I never thought silence could hum, but the office that morning felt like it was vibrating under my feet. Maybe it was the tension, maybe it was the way everyone whispered her name, like she'd suddenly become royalty. My boss, Dana Wells, had just closed a $10 million contract. 10 million. People clapped when she walked in. Someone even brought champagne before lunch. And the whole time, I stood there thinking about how strange it felt to watch a person celebrate when you already knew they weren't who they pretended to be. I didn't plan to tell this story. Honestly, I'm still not sure I'm ready. But I need someone to hear it, because keeping it inside is like holding my breath, and I held it for far too long. Dana didn't look at me until the room quieted. She smiled the way people do when they're about to enjoy something they know they shouldn't. "Team," she said, "consider this a new era. This company expects strength, discipline." Her eyes rested on me, and zero tolerance for dead weight. For a second, nobody understood what she meant, not even me. Then she held up a single sheet of paper. My name was on it. "Grant," she said almost sweetly. "You're done here." There was a sound, maybe a folder being dropped, maybe someone gasping, but it didn't matter. Everything tunneled. I remember the shift in the room, the way people suddenly found invisible spots on the wall to stare at. I remember the tightness in my chest, not fear, not shame, just disbelief, so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. "What?" I asked, not loudly, not angrily, just stunned. She shrugged. "New leadership, new standards. You don't fit them. Effective immediately." Then she added with this small, victorious smirk, "Security will escort you out." That was the moment I realized it wasn't a decision. It was a performance. Two men from the lobby appeared behind me, hands politely folded in front of them like they weren't about to drag me through a place where I'd poured my life for 6 years. Someone muttered my name. Someone else backed up to let us pass. My chair was already being pushed aside by one of Dana's assistants, as if erasing me would somehow polish her image. As they walked me out, people avoided my eyes except for one guy, Tom from IT, who looked at me like he wanted to say something but didn't. Maybe he was scared, maybe he was smart. I kept my head up. If they were going to parade me through the office like some cautionary tale, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. I didn't fight it. I didn't argue. I just walked, feeling the weight of every stare, every whispered, "What happened?" that followed behind me. Outside, the guard handed me a cardboard box with the few things they'd swept off my desk. A mug, a notebook, my badge. It was ridiculous how small my life looked inside that box. I sat in my car for a long time with the engine off, the heat rising in waves across the windshield, my hands locked on the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't punch anything. I didn't even curse. I just sat there replaying Dana's smile, that sharp, satisfied curve that said she finally had the power to cut someone just because she felt like it. And here's the thing nobody in that office knew. I wasn't dead weight. I wasn't even replaceable. I was the only person who fully understood the structure of the system behind her $10 million contract. The only one who knew how fragile it really was. The only one who had warned her, quietly, carefully, that parts of the back-end model weren't stable enough to scale. She ignored me, of course. She always ignored me. But the risk hadn't gone away just because she didn't like who pointed it out. In fact, the risk had gotten worse. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, letting the truth settle like a stone dropping into deep water. She thought she'd made an example out of me. She thought dragging me out would tell the board she was fearless, decisive, unstoppable. But she didn't know what she'd just done. And she definitely didn't know how much she needed the one person she'd humiliated in front of everyone. I started the engine not because I had anywhere to go. When you lose your job, your schedule disappears like smoke. But because sitting still felt impossible. The longer I thought about the morning, the more the edges of the event sharpened into something almost unreal. fired in front of the whole floor, dragged out, stripped of my badge like a warning to everyone else. Follow her or fall. But somewhere under all of that humiliation, a different feeling began to rise. Not anger, not revenge, certainty. Dana had no idea how close her victory was to becoming a disaster. And as I pulled out of the parking garage, leaving behind the building where I'd spent years fixing problems she never even knew existed, a single thought kept echoing in my head. She just fired the one person who could save her. The first day after they fired me felt like a sick day I'd forgotten to cancel. I woke up at my usual time, made coffee on autopilot, and stood in the kitchen with my mug, waiting for my calendar alert to buzz, even though there was nothing left to remind me of. My phone stayed blank for an hour. No emails, no calls, just a quiet little void where my life used to be. Around 10 it started. First, a text from Tom in IT. "Dude, you okay?" I stared at the screen for a second, thumb hovering. "Yeah," I typed. "I'll live," he answered almost immediately. Wells is acting like she just executed a coup. Full floor meeting. Tough decisions. That kind of crap. I could almost hear him rolling his eyes. "Makes sense," I wrote back. "She needed a body for the altar." He sent a skull emoji, then added, "Also, they're already asking about your scripts for the billing engine. I told them you documented, but..." Yeah, of course they were. Dana loved to say nothing is irreplaceable in meetings. It sounded strong in a slide deck. It sounded different when the thing you'd ripped out had been holding half the system together. By noon, I got an email from HR. Short, sanitized, full of phrases like "effective immediately" and "we appreciate your contribution." It also included a line that made me laugh out loud, sharp and humorless. "Please make yourself available for a brief knowledge transfer call if needed." They'd dragged me out with security, and now they wanted a favor. I closed the email without replying. I made a sandwich, ate half of it standing at the counter, and realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from this low-grade anger I'd been swallowing for years. All the late nights, the weekends, the just one more revision on proposals that Dana would present as if she'd written them in her sleep. I'd told myself it was worth it because that's just how corporate life is. You work, someone else smiles for the photo, except now I wasn't even in the picture. My laptop pinged. A LinkedIn notification Dana had posted. "Honored to lead our team into a new chapter," she'd written. "Today we secured a 10-member partnership that will redefine our market. Sometimes leadership requires hard choices to protect excellence. I'm proud to say we made them. Hard choices. Protect excellence." She turned firing me into a talking point. The comments were a mix of congratulations and buzzwords. Inspiring. True leadership. People who didn't know me at all, hitting like and clap emojis, applauding a story where I was the unnamed villain, dragging the hero down. I closed the app before I could reach through the screen. The thing about humiliation is that it doesn't just sit there. It seeps. It slides into old memories and rewrites them. Suddenly, every time she'd brushed off my concerns in a meeting, every time she'd said, "Don't overthink it, Grant. Just get it done," felt like a warning I'd ignored. That afternoon, another message from Tom. They pulled Chloe into a room for handover. "She's pale as hell. She's not a back-end person, man. She does dashboards. I knew that. Everyone knew that. Except, apparently, the person who just announced to the world that she was protecting excellence. Chloe used to bring me coffee when we were crunching numbers together. She'd sit on the edge of my desk and ask me to explain why the system spit out certain risk scores. I'd walk her through it, how the pipeline ingested client data, how we transformed it, how the billing engine matched usage to tiers. It took months for her to really see it, and she was smart. Now Dana was going to pretend that you could just drag and drop a human being into that job, like moving a file. But that was just the beginning. The next day, Tom called instead of texting. I almost didn't pick up. When you're newly unemployed, every call feels like it might be a lifeline or another weight. "What's up?" I answered. "You really want to know?" he asked. "Try me." He blew out a breath. "They pushed the first test run of the new client's data through your system this morning." "It's not my system anymore," I said automatically. "Yeah, well, it still has your name in half the comments." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "And? And it choked," he said. "Hard. Billing estimates are all over the place. Some accounts show 0. Some show 6 figures. Legal's freaking out. Finance is investigating. Dana's blaming the data set." Of course she was. I'd warned her about that exact scenario 2 months ago, in a meeting she left halfway through to take a call. "Did they change the scaling thresholds?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Yep. Dana wanted a more aggressive model, higher margins. They shoved it through without properly testing with real client profiles. Now we've got 3 different departments trying to figure out why the same customer is worth a different amount every time they refresh." I closed my eyes. I could see the architecture in my head, clear as the day I'd drawn it on the whiteboard. If you pushed it too hard, too fast, with the wrong assumptions, the whole thing twisted. "Chloe okay?" I asked. Tom hesitated. "She's trying. They keep asking her questions that are above her pay grade. She keeps saying, 'That was Grant's area.' And Dana keeps saying, 'Grant isn't here anymore. We move forward.'" I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. After the call, I sat on my couch with my laptop open, cursor blinking in a blank email draft to HR. I could have written a clean professional message. "Here are the likely failure points. Here's how to fix them before the client notices. Here's what you need to revert." It would have taken me 15 minutes. My fingers hovered over the keys. Then I thought about Dana's speech, the way her eyes lit up when security walked up behind me, the way she framed it as strength to a room full of people who knew exactly how much I carried for her. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late so she could walk into a board meeting with perfect numbers and perfectly rehearsed lines. I realized that every time I'd stepped in to fix something quietly, I'd been saving her from the consequences of her own arrogance. That night, I stopped being the hero. I closed the laptop and pushed it away. No email, no warnings, no free safety net for someone who made sure I had none. Later that week, messages from the old team started to sound different. Less gossip, more panic. Clients asking for a breakdown of the projections. Dana keeps deflecting. Legal wants to know why the model doesn't match the contract language. They're pulling logs now. This is getting ugly. One of the analysts, Marco, called me from his car on his lunch break. "Grant, off the record," he said, voice low. "If we sent those numbers as is, could the client sue us?" "If what Tom told me is accurate," I said carefully, "it's not fraud. Yet. It's incompetence. But if they knowingly send numbers they can't justify, that changes." He swore under his breath. "They're pushing us to push it through. Dana keeps saying the model was validated. We're just scaling." "It was validated under a different configuration," I replied. "Different assumptions. Different risk profile. She knows that." "Yeah," he said quietly. "She does?" I could hear the resentment in his voice, the exhaustion, the unfairness of being the one holding the bag for someone else's decision. I knew that feeling too well. "You know I can't step in," I told him. "Legally, professionally. I'm out." "I get it," he said. "I just needed to hear someone say I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy, Marco," I said. "You're just in the blast radius." After we hung up, I sat in the dim light of my living room, listening to the refrigerator hum, the faint traffic outside, the quiet of a life suddenly stripped down to basics. Food, rent, time. Part of me still wanted to fix it, not for Dana, for the people like Marco and Chloe who were about to get trampled when this thing blew up, for the client who thought they were buying a system held together by competence instead of ego. But another colder part of me had started taking notes. They didn't just fire me, they erased me. They took my work, my warnings, my name off the whiteboard, and replaced it with a narrative where the only thing wrong with the company had been me. So I let their story run. Days passed. The text got shorter. Another meeting. Everyone's pissed. Clients requesting a full technical review. I stayed out of it, watching from the distance they'd created, feeling something shift inside me. I wasn't the guy patching holes in a sinking ship anymore. I was standing on the shore, watching to see who would admit they needed a lifeline. The first sign that things were breaking came on a Thursday morning, just before 8. I was loading groceries into the trunk when my phone buzzed. Once, then again, then in a flood. 10 messages from Tom, 3 from Marco, a missed call from a number I recognized as the front desk of my old building. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering Tom's call. "Grant," he said without even saying hello, "the model blew up." "What do you mean?" I asked, though the tone of his voice already told me. "I mean the client ran their first pre-integration audit this morning, and the numbers were so off they thought we sent them the wrong data set. They asked for a meeting, legal joined, then finance, then operations." He paused. "And Dana." The way he said her name made something cold settle in my stomach. "What happened?" I asked. "They asked her to walk them through the model. Live, step by step." Another pause. "Grant, she couldn't. She kept talking about strategic adjustments and optimizing for scale. But when they pushed her for the logic behind the transformation layers, she froze. Completely. Then she tried to blame the engineering team for not documenting." I swallowed. "Did anyone correct her?" "Oh yeah," he said. "Chloe tried. She kept pointing at diagrams, saying the system wasn't built for the volume or the assumptions Dana promised. But Dana shut her down in front of everyone. "That's not what Grant told me," she said. I blinked. "She used my name?" "Like you were still on payroll," he muttered. "Like you'd validated the whole thing personally before you left." Then he added quietly, "She's cornered, man. And when she's cornered, she starts swinging." Chaos doesn't explode all at once in a company. It creeps. It leaks through hallways and Slack channels, and conference rooms with closed blinds. But that day, it didn't creep. It raced. By noon, the client had escalated the issue to the board. By 3, the board had demanded a full technical and financial reconciliation. And by 5, 3 senior managers were locked in a room trying to understand why the entire billing model behaved like a slot machine. I didn't hear all of this at once. It came in pieces. Calls, texts, screenshots, frantic messages asking questions I'd answered months ago while Dana checked her reflection in the glass walls of the conference room. But the moment everything shifted, truly shifted, came later that night. Marco called, whispering like he was hiding in a stairwell. "They found your old email," he said. "What email?" "The one you sent after testing the early model. The warning." I went still. I'd forgotten about that message. I sent it 6 months ago. I'd written, "The system won't scale under projected volume without recalibrating thresholds and running a full regression against real client profiles. If we don't adjust, we risk catastrophic variance in billing outputs." I remembered how she responded. "Thanks. We'll discuss later." We never did. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "They pulled it up during the board call," he said. "One of the VPs asked why the warning wasn't reviewed. Dana denied seeing it. She blamed spam filters." He paused, breathing unevenly. "Grant." Her read receipt was visible on the chain. I closed my eyes. "And then," I asked him, "they asked who wrote the model," Marco whispered, "and they said your name, out loud, multiple times. Some of the board members didn't even know you were gone." My grip tightened around the phone. "They thought I was gone," I said before I could stop myself. "You weren't," Marco replied. "The company was unraveling, and I wasn't there to stop it this time." Later that evening, I reheated leftover pasta and sat at the kitchen table while my phone buzzed nonstop. People who hadn't spoken to me in months were suddenly eager to remind me that they'd always appreciated my work. Someone from HR sent a vague, overly polite message asking if I'd Be open to a conversation regarding recent technical inquiries. A director I barely knew emailed me personally, calling me instrumental and asking whether I was available for urgent consultation. I ignored all of it. By 9, the messages shifted from polite to frantic. Client threatening to suspend integration. Board wants a fix by Monday. Dana is in her office with the blinds closed, hasn't come out for hours. She asked where your final architecture notes are. No one knows. Then Tom sent me a photo. It was my old desk, and sitting in my chair was a consultant I'd never seen before, hands on the keyboard, looking like he was in over his head before he'd even logged in. I could almost feel the desperation seeping out of that screenshot. They were throwing bodies at a fire that didn't need manpower, it needed memory, context, history. Someone who knew where the first brick had been laid and why the foundation creaked when too much weight pushed down on the wrong corner. Someone who wasn't there anymore. Around 10, Tom called again. This time his voice wasn't frantic. It was tired, defeated. "They're blaming you," he said softly. "What?" "Dana's spinning it like you left gaps, like you built a flawed system and then vanished, right when we needed you. She's saying firing you was unfortunate timing." A slow heat bloomed in my chest. Not anger, not bitterness, something sharper. "And the board?" I asked. "They're not buying it," he said. "They're not stupid. They saw the email. They saw the timestamps. And the client wants answers before the quarter ends." I rubbed my jaw. "They won't get them without proper analysis." "No," he agreed. "They won't." He hesitated, then said, "They're going to call you." I didn't answer, because I already knew. People think collapse is loud, explosive, dramatic. But sometimes collapse is a quiet acknowledgement from a company that spent years pretending it was stronger than it was. We can't save ourselves. And it hit me then, solid, undeniable. They needed me, not as an employee, not as a scapegoat, not as someone Dana could drag out to make herself look powerful. They needed me because the entire house she'd built was held together by the things she never understood. I put my phone down, stared at the dark window. My reflection looked calm, almost cold, like a man who had finally stepped out of a storm he didn't realize he'd been standing in. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. Things fall exactly the way they're built to fall. The call came early on Monday morning, just after sunrise. I was pouring coffee, half asleep, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Old instinct, new life. But something in the back of my mind told me to answer. "Grant?" a man asked, voice crisp, rehearsed. "This is Daniel Hart from Operations." I sipped my coffee. "Good morning." "I'll get straight to it," he said. "We're in a situation that requires your expertise." Of course they were. He explained it carefully, too carefully, like someone walking across thin ice, every sentence placed with caution. He listed the failures, the discrepancies, the numbers no one could justify. He mentioned the client's escalating concerns. He mentioned the board's pressure. And finally, he mentioned her name. "Dana believes the system requires temporary stabilization. We believe it requires a full structural analysis." "Then you're right," I said. He paused before continuing. "We'd like to bring you in as an independent consultant. Temporary. High urgency." Independent consultant, not employee, not scapegoat, not the guy they dragged out by security. A choice. "What do you need from me?" I asked. He exhaled like he'd been waiting for that question all weekend. "Everything," he said, "or at least enough to stop this from collapsing." I didn't give him an answer right away. I let the silence stretch until he cleared his throat. "This isn't about the past," he added. "It's about saving the contract." I almost smiled. It was never about the past for them, only for the people they stepped on. "Email me the scope," I said. "I'll review it." He sounded relieved in a way that made it obvious he expected me to say no. An hour later, the contract hit my inbox. The rate was high, higher than I expected, higher than they would ever have paid me as an employee. And the timeline, brutal, 48 hours. I read it twice, signed it, sent it back. When I walked into the building later that afternoon, the receptionist's expression flickered. Surprise, confusion, something like guilt. She buzzed me through without asking for ID. It was strange stepping into a place that had thrown me out. The carpet was the same. The faint smell of burnt coffee was the same. The hum of cheap fluorescent lights, same. Nothing had changed except the way people looked at me now. Not with pity, not with avoidance, with hope, like I was a firefighter walking into a building they'd accidentally set on fire. Tom saw me first. He froze mid-step, holding a stack of printouts. "Holy, you're here." "So it seems," I said. He opened his mouth to apologize. For what? I didn't know. But I shook my head. "Which room?" I asked. He pointed toward the glass conference room at the end of the hall. The blinds were half closed, but not enough to hide the shape of someone pacing inside. I pushed the door open without knocking. Dana stopped mid-stride. Her heels clicked as she turned, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. Not weak, just stripped of the armor she'd always worn. Her hands tightened around a folder. She didn't smile. She didn't smirk. She didn't pretend she'd won anything. "Grant," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." I took a seat across from the board members, not next to her, not even on the same side of the table. "Let's work," I said, and we did. For the next 7 hours, I rebuilt the model from the inside out. I traced every misconfiguration, every overwritten threshold, every shortcut someone took when they tried to mimic things they didn't understand. I watched the board take notes as I laid out the real architecture, the dependencies, the risk flags I'd documented a dozen times before she ever called herself a visionary. Dana hardly spoke. When she did, her voice sounded different, thinner, stretched. She tried to interject once, but one of the directors gently placed a hand on her folder and said, "Let him finish." By midnight, we had a working blueprint. By 2 a.m., the new estimates stabilized. By dawn, I had a full remediation plan printed and signed. When we wrapped, the room was silent except for the scratch of pens. Finally, Daniel looked up. "This is impressive," he said. "You've saved us." I shrugged lightly. "You had the pieces. You just put them in the wrong order." A few people almost laughed. Quiet, tired relief. Dana didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the table. "You're done?" she asked. "For now," I said. As I gathered my notes, one of the executives stepped closer. "We'd like to discuss a longer-term position." "No," I said before he could continue. "I didn't do this to come back." He blinked. "Then why?" I thought about that for a moment, about the humiliation, the anger, the long quiet days after they threw me out, about the people who'd stayed, struggling under decisions they didn't make, about the system I'd built with care, only to watch it crack under someone else's ego. "Because I don't leave things broken," I told him, "even when I walk away from them." They nodded, not fully understanding, but understanding enough. I left the building just as the sun was rising, turning the glass walls gold. On my way out, Tom caught up to me. "They're letting her go," he said quietly. "Board decision." I slowed. "Today?" "This morning?" I didn't feel vindicated, not triumphant, just settled, like something that had been tilted for months had finally clicked back into place. "She'll land somewhere," I said. "Yeah," Tom agreed, "but not here. Not after this." I reached the lobby doors. He hesitated. "You did the right thing, you know," he said. "I didn't do it for her." "I know." Outside, the air felt clean, brighter than it had any right to be after the night I'd had. I walked to my car with tired steps and a clearer head than I'd had in a long time. Before I started the engine, I checked my phone. One new email from the board. Subject: Offer. Senior Director of System Strategy. I stared at it for a moment. I didn't open it. Not yet. I wasn't rushing back into the place that threw me out, but knowing the door was offered, not taken, not forced, but offered, settled something deep in my chest. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. And sometimes that's all a man needs.